Welcome to Spiritual Psychology. My name's Renee LaValle McKenna. I'm a therapist and shamanic healer. And today I want to talk about lower power. I've been working with personal growth and therapy for over 30 years, and spirituality has been intrinsic in much of my process. I'm always looking for helpful ways to name Source, or the divine, or God, whatever you want to call it. I work with a lot of people who have turned away from organized religion and more traditional approaches to spirituality. And for lots of people, the word God has become corrupted. I've spent a lot of time in 12-step circles, and the term higher power is used a lot. And when I get introduced to shamanism, my first shamanic experience was to connect with a power animal and explore my relationship with power. And I find it really helpful to look at spirituality and our own relationship with it from the perspective of power. I did an interview with my friend Rory Cassandra the other day, and she said, we're spiritual beings in a meat suit having a human experience. I like that idea. One way to reframe spirit is to think about it as energy. Certainly on an atomic level, we are talking about energy, that everything is actually a whirling configuration of electrons, protons, and neutrons, at least in the material world. And then there's the space that lies between them. I personally think that space is where divinity lives. But starting on an atomic level, everything's in motion. Everything has energy. Everything has power. And what powers that motion? It's fascinating to look at how the micro and the macro reflect each other. And there are forces spinning the electrons, protons, and neutrons on an atomic level, and there are many forces spinning us on a human level, and certainly many forces spinning us on a societal and a global level. One of the advantages of difficulty or crisis is that it makes us pay attention in a different way. And it can certainly be a catalyst for change. And although change can be challenging, it's also promising. So while physicists ponder the forces that operate on an atomic level, I want to make some observations about the forces that operate on a human level. And there's a lot of different ways to talk about power, but from the perspective of higher power or lower power, I think it's easiest to consider motivation. And motivation can be conscious or it can be unconscious. And the more conscious our motivation, the more conscious our motives, or how we are motioning ourselves, how we're powering ourselves, then the more intentional our life is. As I've considered this concept of higher power, it's become obvious to me that if there's higher power, there has to be lower power. Now, certainly from a fundamentalist perspective, we could say this is like God and the devil. And I suppose on the most simplistic terms, our motivations can be divided into selfish or unselfish, good motives or bad motives, constructive or destructive. And maybe it's helpful to think about higher power or lower power in this way. My experience is that we all have both. And this is where our free will and our intention is very important, because we do have choice in how we motivate ourselves. There's an old story, and it bears repeating if I've told it before. This boy is at his grandfather's house, and there's 2 dogs in the backyard. And there's the nice dog that lives in the house, and there's the mean dog that gets chained up out back, and they're fighting. And the boy says, "Grandpa, which dog's going to win the fight?" And the grandfather says, "The dog that I feed the most." Animal rights advocacy aside, it really is a metaphor for the higher power and lower power that exist within all of us. And what do we feed within ourselves? Or what do we use to motivate ourselves? You know, lots of us have learned to move ourselves forward using our own inner critic as a taskmaster. Lots of people come to me really suffering with internalized shame and blame, humiliation, and fear as ways that they motivate themselves. Fear of rejection, fear of not being accepted or not good enough, fear of getting in trouble. And although these things can move us forward and motivate ourselves to work and show up and the way we behave with other people, they're pretty destructive dynamics and they can become a habit. This is one aspect of what I call lower power. Another aspect of lower power is when we get power by harming or disempowering others. You can gain power by being abusive or manipulative or playing power dynamics where you disempower another person with bullying or humiliation or little digs. Generally, when we're putting someone else down, there's an attempt to raise ourselves up, and that's lower power. That's power stealing from another person. So when we harm other people, physically, emotionally, sexually, mentally, or spiritually, generally we're gathering power from them, disempowering others to power ourselves, making someone small to make myself feel bigger. Gossip is a really common form of lower power. Another form of lower power is anger and resentment, my personal favorite. In its healthy form, anger really does provide us with a lot of energy. It tells us that our boundaries have been crossed, or that we need to take action to protect ourselves or others, or that there's something out of integrity. And the energy of anger can propel us beyond our usual boundaries or ideas of what's appropriate to actually take constructive action. But when we have anger and we don't take constructive action, or when we take that anger and we use it to abuse other people, then it can become lower power. So when anger turns into resentment, I love the breakdown of the word resentment. Re is to repeat, and sent is to feel. And so a resentment is to re-feel something over and over. And I know that I've nursed some particularly long resentments. My mother was a favorite. My first husband was another. In fact, a lot of my early relationships with men were about, one of the big aspects of them was resenting them and feeling all this justified anger that really fueled me. But I kept it a secret. Anger and resentment was my own secret little fuel pile. Judgment and righteous indignation can be lower power, not only to make us feel better than other people, but also that the energy of the emotion itself is a power source. Another way to source lower power is by being a victim, by always blaming others, or by not taking responsibility for yourself. It's very common to not do our own work and face our fears and grow in areas where we're underdeveloped, and kind of collapse or be irresponsible and either force or manipulate others into taking care of us, either consciously or unconsciously. I know my son does that by not feeding himself. Did you eat today? No. All right, let me cook you something. Oh my goodness. So lower power is often manipulating or stealing power from other people when we don't feel like we have enough of our own. Lower power is definitely power in that it fuels action, but it's generally destructive. The difference between lower power and higher power is that lower power is typically harmful on some level. It spreads difficult feelings and it's rooted in fear. Higher power, on the other hand, is constructive, generally encourages personal growth of yourself and others, and it spreads goodwill. So usually we turn to lower power in desperation when we believe that we don't have access to higher power. What are some forms of higher power? Love, joy, hope, trust, creativity, courage, connection. These are constructive power sources. And when we don't have access to these, we feel disempowered and either become depleted or seek power in any form we can get it. We can understand racism and terrorism and war. In fact, most social suffering is rooted in lower power, disempowering or violence or even killing others to try to make ourselves feel better, safer, more powerful, more secure. I came on this book when my kids were in preschool. Have You Filled a Bucket Today? It's by Carol McLeod, and it's a guide for daily happiness for kids. And it's the idea that we all walk around with a bucket, and we can fill our own bucket or the bucket of others with kindness and respect, and make the world a happier place for everybody, including ourselves. Or we can be a bucket dumper, say things and act in ways that make people feel bad about themselves, or bring more negativity into the world. Simple concept, but a very useful one. If I'm a bucket filler, I'm sourcing higher power. If I'm a bucket dumper, I'm sourcing lower power. The good news is when I fill the invisible bucket of others with love and kindness, encouragement, my own bucket gets filled as well. And of course, the reverse is true. Although I might want to dump the bucket of others and steal what's inside of it to fill my own, it doesn't work that way because we're all connected. And even if I'm not intentionally bucket dumping someone else's life energy, what if there's a constant drain in my own? What if there's a hole in my own bucket? If my own bucket is constantly being dumped by other people or situations at work, in relationship, or even just in my own inner self-talk, that's lower power. And I see it a lot in working directly with people's inner motivations and their inner suffering, their inner defensive structures, the advantage of spiritual psychology, working with the active imagination and being able to make these internal systems concrete. We can even personify them, our inner demons, our fears, our destructive habits, our old operating systems that might have worked at one time and now they're destructive. So these inner demons, we can actually ask them questions and interact with them. It's fascinating. And pretty much across the board, they feed on suffering. And there's aspects of ourself that feed on our own suffering. That's lower power. That all humans across the board have places that we're attached to our own suffering. Whether it's the inner story or narrative we have about ourself, our childhood, our life, our work, any repetitive narrative we have, whether it's about the asshole neighbor or the horrible mother-in-law, these can be little seed pods in the weeds of lower power in our life garden. So how do you source higher power? And where are you using lower power to motivate or move or drain or discourage yourself in your life? We all do it. And if we become consciously aware of it, then we have the power to change it and decide which dog we feed. Am I a bucket filler or a bucket dumper? That's the question for this week. Blessings on your path until we meet again. This is Renee LaValle McKenna for Spiritual Psychology.